Welcome everyone to Enterprise.expert. Today is August 17th, and our monthly webinar has different topics every month. Today's topic is going to be on QuickBooks Enterprise inventory assemblies and manufacturing. We're going to talk about all the manufacturing concepts that are tied to QuickBooks Enterprise, or that we work in QuickBooks Enterprise. And in some cases, these things are going to work in QuickBooks Premier, QuickBooks Pro as well. But we're going to be focusing a lot about the things that you can do in Enterprise. So today's content, we'll spend about 5 minutes just real quick talking about Enterprise.expert, the website, the webinar series in itself. Then we'll spend about 10 minutes talking about basic manufacturing concepts. Then we'll do about 40 minutes on assembly and manufacturing processes, and then about 5 minutes for Q&A. So the webinar will be roughly about an hour. So who is Enterprise.expert? It's a community of experts in the enterprise level technology. We manifest ourselves in this webinar in our website, http enterprise.expert, no .com, no www, and continue the conversation. We have the conversation all month long in our Facebook group. So if you just search Enterprise Expert or Enterprise.expert in the Facebook search for groups, you can join the group. Now, what does Enterprise.expert mean? We're focused on medium-sized or established businesses that rely heavily on technology to run their operations. By technology, we're specifically talking about software, hardware, cloud-based solutions that are needed to run the business, most specifically on accounting solutions, database, ERP type of solutions. And by expert, this is any community member that wants to share their experience, knowledge, and learnings from this technology. For the time being, it's me who's kind of just leading the way here. But as I get more and more people involved, we want to get more community experts. So about the webinar series, every third Wednesday of every month, like today, we're going to have these webinars, different topics. You register once, you will be registered for all of them. So you don't have to do anything else. Just wait for the email and log in once a month. We may have a special episode. We haven't had one yet with sponsored or collaborated content. We haven't had that yet. For now, we've just done the regular monthly episodes. These webinars do not qualify for CPE or ACE for Advanced Pro Advisors. We have a strong focus on accounting level technologies. During 2016, this year, we're going to do all QuickBooks Enterprise, and hopefully coming next year, we'll do other non-QuickBooks Enterprise topics, maybe some add-ons, or maybe even some competing product. My name is Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA, Certified Information Technology Professional. I'm the CEO of Garcia CPA, which is an accounting and integrated technologies consulting firm here in Miami. And my email is hector@garciacpa.com. So if you want to email me, that's the best email to send to me, hector@garciacpa.com. Other recommended events, if this is the first time connecting to Enterprise.expert or any of the webinars that I do, is the QB Power Hour webinars. Thursday of next week, we're going to be doing a deep dive into job costing, completely different than this episode here on manufacturing. But we're going to talk about job costing and construction, and that one qualifies for CPE and ACE for Advanced QuickBooks Pro Advisors. Upcoming webinars, next month, we're going to talk about what's new in QuickBooks Enterprise 2017, and that's assuming that by the 21st that version comes out. If it does come out by the 21st, we'll be talking about all the new features in 2017. Then in October, we're going to be talking about QuickBooks Enterprise for contractors and construction business. And then November and December, topics are still up in the air, but the ones that are there are the ones that have been proposed. All right, so let's jump in right into the context. Let's talk about manufacturing in QuickBooks Enterprise. Let me go ahead and turn off my webcam. Really don't need my webcam at this point. And let's talk about some of the basic manufacturing concepts. Now, I think for the most part, if you're an accountant or an experienced QuickBooks user or IT consultant in the manufacturing world, these things are things you already know, but I think it's worth it reviewing them no matter what. So first important concept is direct manufacturing cost. Direct manufacturing costs are going to be typically everything that we consider to be part of the cost of the final product. So the actual materials that we use during manufacturing, the actual components, those are going to be direct manufacturing costs and also direct labor. Now in QuickBooks, adding labor is actually not that easy. So we're going to show sort of the workarounds for that because it's not so straightforward as doing standard manufacturing processes. So we're going to show you how to do it with and without payroll and without labor really. And you're going to understand kind of the differences and the consequences. You also have indirect manufacturing costs, which for the most part, we don't consider as part of the final assembled cost. Now, if for managerial accounting people, if we have anybody here in the webinar, indirect manufacturing cost does matter. And if you were using some sort of managerial accounting where you did want to take part of the rent of the building and part of the machinery depreciation and all of that stuff and add it to the manufacturing cost, you could, but it's just impractical. So we typically are going to ignore indirect manufacturing costs in terms of assembling that as part of the cost. And then you have all the administrative overhead, like the actual office rent, the non-manufacturing employees, office supplies, all that stuff would be the administrative overhead or the non-manufacturing cost. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. Now, once we are starting to account for the materials that we purchase that are going to be part of the manufacturing process, every single part that we buy, whether it's an inventory part or a non-inventory part from QuickBooks terms, that's going to be considered raw materials. And we're going to create an asset account just for that one. I'll show you that as well. Then there is a possibility that when we manufacture in steps. Maybe we do one level of processing and the product is sort of in this intermediary mode, where it's not really a raw material, but it's not really a finished good. That would be considered a work in process. So any process that you have started but have not yet completed, however, in itself can be evaluated, it can be looked at, it can be measured, that would be considered work in process. Now, most manufacturing companies that I do work with actually only do raw materials and finished goods. Not that many actually have a work in process that we account for. But if that's the case, that would be an assembly in itself. And as we talk about assemblies, that stuff will make a lot more sense. Now, the finished good is going to be the final assembly is going to contain the raw materials and possibly some work in process assemblies, sub-assemblies that we spoke about just now. And that's going to be when the product is completely ready to be sold. Okay, now let's talk about some QuickBooks concepts in itself. Typically, we're going to be working with non-inventory parts, inventory parts, other charges, and inventory assemblies. So non-inventory parts are components that we could use as part of the value of the final assembly, but we don't track how many we have in stock, and we don't track their value for inventory valuation purposes. An inventory part, however, would be a raw material that we also track their value in stock, and this is typically the largest component of the finished good. Other charges, we can use that other charge option to track indirect or direct costs, as we spoke about earlier, things like shipping, manufacturing process, through that are tied to labor or maybe an outside service. All that stuff is the typical stuff that goes with other charge. Now, finally, the last inventory part that we're going to use, the last item we're going to use is the inventory assembly. And this could be for a work in process or a finished good. That's one of the areas that people get quite confused in, because most people assume that because it's an inventory assembly, it automatically has to be a finished good. It is not the case. Some inventory assemblies are considered to be work in process. Then there is a function in QuickBooks called build assembly. And this is the one function that we use to convert raw materials into work in process or finished goods. An assembly could be marked as a pending build. A pending build would be considered an incomplete build. It would be a build that was actually manually flagged as pending because the user wanted to do it for whatever reason, or because you didn't have enough inventory in stock to actually consume those components and create the assembly. So QuickBooks will automatically convert an assembly to a pending build which basically doesn't post into my accounting. And then we have our bill of materials, which is going to be the list of part and components and charges that are part of the assembly process. Okay, so those are the basic concepts that we wanted to cover. I can now close that and go into my QuickBooks file here. You should be able to see my QuickBooks file here. And let's start with a couple of basic concepts. I'm going to go into my balance sheet. So I'm going to go to company financial balance sheet standard. And we'll start just by looking at two components I have here, which are raw materials and work in process. And I kind of want to show you where those came from. So let me go into my item list and click on item list. And then in here, let me see if I can drag this to the right a little bit so we can have a little bit better visuals. Perfect. Okay, so in my item list here, we have a couple of items here that are considered to be finished goods. So we have these two products here considered to be finished goods. And basically, when I create them as an assembly, down here in the bottom, you see where it says inventory asset. I basically tell it, oh, this is going to be an inventory asset and a sub-account called finished goods. Let me close out of that. We're going to get to that type in a second. Then we have some of our inventory parts here. As you can see, these four here that are considered to be raw materials. And the way I identify them as raw materials is I make sure that here on the bottom where it says inventory account, I have a sub-account for it called raw materials. So that's the basic way that we know what's what. It's by their asset account. The biggest mistake that people make is that they only have one asset account called inventory asset. They throw everything in there, and then it makes it very difficult for them to know what's raw materials, what's finished goods, and what's work in process. So let's start with the first process here, which is this item called alloy. Okay, so before I get there, I just want to talk about what we do here. So this company takes copper and gold and it mixes it together and it creates an alloy, a mix of the two. And then from that alloy, it takes little pieces and creates a little jewelry out of it, right? So that's the example that we're doing here. So we have copper, which we purchase by the pound. There's my cost and my sales price. Although I'm not really going to sell raw materials, we typically never ever sell raw materials. So one thing I recommend that you do is under sales price, always put 0, and then under sales information, put here do not sell. That way, and this is just kind of a trick, that way when a QuickBooks user it's going to create an invoice, if they put this item in the invoice, it says do not sell, it's got a 0 sales price, hopefully they won't make the mistake and sell this product. Now here under cost, it's really, really important that you are updating this cost, typically with their average cost. So you see how the calculated average is 139.99. So in order to make sure, whoops, I hit the wrong button there, but that's the 139. So in order to make sure that that number it's going to be accurate accounted for in my manufacturing processes, I'm going to put here their cost and I put their 140, whatever it is. I can round up if I want to. So it's really important that my cost in the item screen matches my average cost. And this is something that you may have to maintain manually. Unfortunately, that's just kind of what the process is. Same thing with gold. Let me edit my gold by the pound. And let's say my average cost is 1435, and I'm just kind of estimating it. And then here I'm going to put do not sell. And we'll do an example of why that's important. And under sales price, I'll put 0. Okay, there we go. And then I'll hit OK. So now I got my two raw materials that are configured correctly. There's my cost. There's no sales price. That's the way they're supposed to be. So now let's say the first step of the manufacturing process is we combine so much copper and so much gold into an alloy. So I'm going to right click in this and click on edit and then show you how this works. So as you see down here, we see the two components. We see copper and then we see gold. Okay, and it has a description which says do not sell, which in this case that's perfect. And under type, it says these are inventory parts. Okay, just fine. Then it tells me my average cost for copper is $140, and I can say, let's say that's a pound. And then I can say, look, what percentage or what percentage of 1 pound of alloy comes from copper. So let's say in this case it's 15, but I'll just change it. Let's say it's 0.40. So in this case, 1 pound of alloy consumes 0.40 pounds of copper. And let's say that of gold, it consumes 0.64. Okay, that way there is, I guess, some waste there, because if you add these two up, it doesn't add up to a pound. So basically with gold we may have some waste, so it actually consumes 0.6 pounds per pound of alloy, and then we calculated that we have about 0.04 waste on each of these. So you have to build in your waste in here. There isn't a separate module to calculate waste, so that's a really important piece to keep track of. And then down here where it says inventory asset, I'm going to pick this work in process sub account. That way every time I assemble this product, it goes into that account. Now down here it says calculated average, and that's going to include, let me maximize the screen here, that is going to include, sorry about that, I have to maximize the screen so you can see better, that is going to include anything that I have assembled in the past. So at this point, maybe we had a price change in our cost of our raw materials, and now we have a new bill of materials cost of $974.40. Now down here, up here where it says cost, it gives you three options. One says global preference, which basically means it goes back into a preference in the edit menu somewhere, which we'll discuss in a second. There's user-defined cost, where I actually tell it manually how much I think my cost for this alloy is, and that's the actual cost that's going to be included on the next assembly that we create. Or we can pick what I think is the best choice, total BOM cost, which basically grays out the screen and it picks the actual number from the bill of materials and it adds it as the cost of my components. Now, the bill of materials screen is really small, really hard to read, so sometimes you may have to click right here where it says full view to get a full bill of materials list. That way, if I happen to have a lot more components, it's a lot more visually appealing to track them this way. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And so that little small piece here is my bill of materials. And again, because this is a work in process, I'm going to put here do not sell. Perfect. Okay. And then I'll hit OK. And that's my work in process. Now, just creating that bill of materials, just creating that inventory assembly item, which by the way, I know this was already created, but the process would be right click new, and then click on inventory assembly. That's how you create inventory assemblies, and you can fill all this information in yourself and get to that that one that I created here. But just creating this doesn't actually process the manufacturing. It doesn't actually take raw materials and puts them into the work in process. You actually need to take action and do something called a build. So in order to build, which means I want to grab these two pieces of metal, copper and gold, and make them into an alloy, I go into the inventory menu and click on build materials, build assemblies. So inventory menu, build assemblies, and then I'm going to hit from my drop down all the different assemblies that I have. These two assemblies, which are already set up, we are not necessarily looking at those details right now. We're going to look at just this one. So just the alloy. And then the minute I select that, you're going to see both of my raw materials are brought up in here. My quantity per item are brought up in here. This is basically my bill of materials that I'm seeing here. But now my bill of materials will be multiplied times how many pounds of alloy I want to build. So based on how much gold I have on hand and how much copper I have on hand, down here in the bottom, it says 179.6875. I know you can't see that well. Let me see if I put in my zoom. I'm going to put my zoom application real quick here so you can see, because I know through a webinar it's not that easy sometimes. There it is. So you see right there it says 179.6875. QuickBooks is calculating for you that based on what's in stock right now, you can build a maximum of 179.68. Now, but in the real world, we don't really build to maximums. We build to order, or there's going to be an assembly order, or some warehouse manager or assembly manager or production manager will say, today I want you to build 50 pounds of alloy. So at this point, we will just type in there 50. So just type in how much you want to build or how much you actually ended up building for the day. You put 50 there, and then you hit tab, and you will notice that QuickBooks will calculate how many pounds I need for component A, how many pounds for component B, and I'll basically calculate. And because I do have them in stock, I'm not going to have any sort of errors. Now, if I do track lot numbers, it's important that at this point I pick my lot numbers. So we discussed lot numbers in the advanced inventory episode last month. If you want to know more about lot numbers, just make sure that you look at last month's webinar that's posted in YouTube already. So I'm going to also give this alloy a lot number as well. So I'm going to give it a lot number. I'll just give it today's date as a lot number, and that would be how we give this particular bunch of alloy a lot. And if I do track these by lot, this is going to be great because I'll be able to then know how much I have from each lot. But I don't want to focus too much on lots. I am going to fill them up because I'll discuss lots in a second in the value of that. But we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit build and close, and that pretty much processes my build. If I right click on my alloy item, okay, if I right click on that and go to quick report, so I right click and click on quick report, okay, quick report. If I do that, it will take me to a report that tells me what are all the transactions that are affecting this particular item. And as you can tell, there was another build I did earlier on, that this build here, this is not the one that we did together. Let me go ahead and delete it. That way we only have one build in there. And then we have the one build we created, which is this one with the 50 pounds. So there's this working process has only been built once. So now this 50 units of alloy should be worth 50, right, times 974.40. And when I go into my balance sheet, so I'm going to go back into my reports company financial balance sheet, I should see that the value of my work in process is right here. If I click on that 34,000, it will take me to the one transaction that I did. So if I double click on that, it takes me to the same transaction. Now, these transactions never show me the monetary value of my build, just the quantities. These are very, very much focused around quantity management, not so much value management. If you needed to know how much of this was worth, you would hit Control Y on your keyboard. So you hit Control Y, it's a keyboard shortcut, and it will take you to a transaction journal, which will let you know what accounts are being debited and what accounts are being credited. And as you can tell, we are crediting $2,500 worth of copper and $32,000 worth of gold, and then it becomes into one lump sum value of 35,512. Now these dollar amounts, really important, these dollar amounts come from the value of the inventory that we put on these bill of materials. Okay, so I hit save and close and close and close. Okay, so now that I have my alloy, I need to now do one more step in the assembly process, which is actually, let's say, cut these up and put them into little finished goods. And each finished good is going to consume 0.00 something of that alloy, plus possibly include other external components to that. So let me show you what I have here, which I have here, my finished good. I'm going to right click and click edit. And let me show you what I did here. Okay, I have from my alloy, so this is each individual component of this finished good here. From my alloy, let's say I can get 1,000 units out of it, right? So let's say I can get 1,000 finished units out of that 1 pound of alloy. So I'm going to put here that the quantity that each unit consumes is 0.001. That way, basically, if I build 1,000 units of finished goods is going to consume an entire pound of alloy, right? So that's basically what that means there. Then let's say that I calculated that my average labor is $16, okay, and I created an item just for it. So I'm just kind of showing you what the item is. So I created an item called direct labor, and I put here under cost $16. I made it an other charge. That's typically what the type of item that I use. You could use a service as well, but I prefer to use other charges just to leave service for something else. At the same point here where it says sales information, I should also put here do not sell, again, because we're not selling these items. And then here, this little checkbox here that says this item is used in assemblies or is a reimbursable charge. If I don't check that, that $16 do not pass through. So it's very important that I hit this little checkbox and I have a cost component here because that is where the cost, the labor costs are coming from for QuickBooks to calculate how much to include in that bill of materials once I include that item there. The other really important piece here, notice that I put this under a sub account under payroll called direct labor allocated. And I did it separate, than the payroll checks, separate than the salaries, just because we're going to see the effect that this has on our financial statements as we build, and we include labor. Okay. So on this second inventory assembly, which is actually a finished good, we're actually including another assembly item, which is this alloy work in process, which we just spoke about. We're including 0.28 hours of labor per unit. So I guess it takes about 20 minutes or so of an employee to actually shape this finished product together. And then it's also consuming one box. I guess the box where the item goes into, and that box is 56 cents. So now we have a total bill of materials cost of $6.01. And here in the top, I can choose whether my cost is a number that I give it manually, or I can choose total BOM cost, which, like I said, is my preferred choice, to have QuickBooks automatically calculate my cost. And as this components change in value, my BOM cost will also change in value. So that's really, really important. Okay. And then here in the description, we're not going to put here do not sell because this is an actual product that we sell. So we'll put here 1 unit of finished jewelry, assuming that that's what we make. And then I'll hit OK. And then let's go ahead and build that one, because it's not just creating the assembly, it's also having to build it. So let me go into inventory, build assemblies, and then select my item up here. And then it says here, based on your inventory stock, the maximum amount you can build is 5,000. So letting you know that because I have 5,000 units of the boxes, and I have 50 pounds of alloy, which allows me to build quite a bit of these units. It tells me here I can build up to 5,000. Let me go ahead and put there 1,200. Let's say I actually ended up building 1,200. Really important that if I'm using lot numbers, to pick my lot number here. And then here on the lot number, again, I'll choose my date as my lot number just so I can track it. Okay, so I'm about to build 1,200 units of it. There's a little checkbox here that says automatically build required sub-assembly. So we'll speak about that in a second too. That's an option that only QuickBooks Enterprise has, where if you didn't have any alloy work in process built, and I wanted to build more than the amount that I had in stock, but I did have enough raw materials pertaining to that particular subassembly, QuickBooks will actually create both assemblies for me. So you can skip the process of having to build the alloy first and then build the final product. Okay, so that's what that little checkbox is. So just keep that in mind whenever looking at that little checkbox that's there. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck that because I don't need that, and then I'm going to hit build and close. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to go into reports, company and financial, balance sheet standard, and now I should see all three components in my balance sheet. I should have some finished goods, some raw materials, and some work in process. Okay, so I got all three of them in my balance sheet. Okay, but the only things that I'm going to sell are going to be coming out of finished goods. So let me go ahead and make the screen a little bit smaller because I'm going to show you an invoice and show you the impact that that's going to have. So let me also pull up a profit and loss report, and I'll do a profit and loss report for today. Okay, and notice that today I have some freight costs in here, and I also have some labor allocated. And this labor allocated here, this is actually coming from our assembly. So notice I have a negative value hitting my expense account because I'm taking the cost away from my payroll expenses. Because normally I would already have a payroll expense there of some sort. Let me just show you the entire month for now. So if you already have a payroll expense you pay, let's say, for example, I paid a third-party payroll company, and this $41,000 was a monthly payroll for everyone. When I actually take labor away from my expense and put it into the value of my asset, you're going to see a negative amount in your financial statement, essentially taking away part of my labor costs and putting them into the value of the product. So that's kind of the tricky part accounting wise, that the labor is coming out of my regular payroll expenses and is coming into the value of my finished goods. Anyway, let's just show this for today. We can leave that here. Let me go ahead and create an invoice. Create invoice. And I'll create an invoice for some of that product. So where's my finished good? And then let's say I'm going to sell 100 of these items. I'll pick my lot number because I'm tracking lots. So I have a sale for $2,000, and I'll hit save and close. So now I should see a sale for $2,000 and a cost of $573.02. Where did that $573.02? That came from the cost of the item. Okay. If I go to reports, inventory valuation summary, I can see my inventory parts here, which are all my raw materials, these first four here, and I see all their costs. And then I see my assemblies, and as I mentioned, some of my assemblies are work in process, like this one called alloy, and some of these are finished goods. And you see the calculated average, which is the average cost of my finished goods, is 5.73, which is why I'm seeing 573 as the cost of goods sold of the units, because I sold 100 units. So that gives you general idea for that. Now, what about this freight cost? Okay, so that's another external component that is often missed in a manufacturing process. So I also want to talk about adding the cost of freight potentially to the assembly process as well. Let's take a look at this freight cost and see that in some cases I paid FedEx externally for freight costs. And then in some cases, as you can tell, I actually paid freight costs in the bill to the vendor itself. Now, if I wasn't going to include the freight cost as part of my raw materials, I should definitely include the freight cost as part of my manufacturing process. That way I take the money out of freight and put it into the raw material. So let's say that I manually, let me go ahead and delete this invoice. I'm going to delete the invoice, and then let me look at my finished goods, and I'm also going to delete this assembly. That way I can show you exactly what we're going to do here. And I'm going to go into my item list, and let's say that the bulk of the cost of my freight, it's importing the copper and the gold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate externally outside of QuickBooks more or less what a pound of these costs to ship. Okay, and let's say that more or less we decided after we did our calculation that it cost us roughly about $1.35 per pound, okay, of freight. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into our alloy, which is our first working process, and we're gonna add freight costs in there. And this is a really important piece. See how the cost is $1? Freight cost, it's always going to be variable. So what most people are going to do is when they create this freight cost, they're going to leave this cost at 0. The problem is if you leave this cost at 0 and then I hit OK, when it comes to my bill of materials, it is impossible for me to add anything to it because everything is going to add up to 0. So it's kind of a trick that in order to be able to just kind of decide on the fly how much I'm going to add of one particular product or component, I will make this cost $1. Okay, again, it's a trick of the trade. You make it $1 and then you hit OK. That way it gives me total control here under quantity, how much freight I want to add per each pound of alloy that I process. So let's say we said it's $1.39. We calculated that's more or less how much freight it costs per pound of alloy, and then we'll hit OK. So then let's go ahead and assemble that alloy now because I deleted that assembly. So let's go to inventory, build assemblies, and then build alloy, and then let's do the same 50 that we did before. Let's do more. Let's do 100, and then we'll hit save and close, and we'll hit OK. Now, you probably didn't notice it because it was so small, but that freight cost actually changed. I'm going to double click on that number, and you're going to notice that freight cost used to be $15,632, but it was reduced by $139, which is what we calculated the cost per assembled unit to be. So this is one sort of indirect way that we can take it away from our cost of goods sold and put it into our working process. Okay. So because now our working process changed in value, so now this is no longer whatever that number was there, 974. It's now 975. When I now assemble the finished good, the finished good itself is going to have a different cost. So let me take a look at that. Okay, so let's assemble this again. So let's go into inventory and let's do build assemblies, and we'll build individual finished goods again, and then we'll build, let's say, 300 of these. Okay, this will calculate how much I need for each, and if I hit Control Y, as I mentioned earlier, after I save it, hit OK. Okay, so if I hit Control Y, I can see it's a different cost component now. Okay, 69,000, and now I should see now in my working process an addition, in my finished goods, an addition there as well. Now I have another item here, okay, to make things a little bit more complex. I have another item here called 12-pack finished good copper. So when I double click on that, notice that this one actually uses one finished good unit, a different box. I guess there's a 12-pack box where you put 12 individual boxes in, and it also uses some direct labor. So let's say this uses 15 minutes, and that would be $4. So now we have a finished good that is $77, which actually uses a combination. It takes part of another finished good and part of the raw materials, and this happens as well, where it's quite possible that in some cases I will have a finished good that maybe I repackage in a way that it's going to become another finished good, and it basically stays from finished good to finished good, but it also takes away from my raw materials. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'll assemble some of those. So let me go into inventory, build assembly, and then I'll assemble some of these 12 packs. And notice that according to what I have in stock, the maximum I can build is 25, and most of it is because I've only assembled a few of these individual units. But if I click this little checkbox that says automatically build subassemblies, notice that now I have a new maximum. My new maximum is 416. Do that again. Uncheck that. My maximum is 25. If I check that, my maximum is 416. Why? Because if I was to tell QuickBooks to automatically build assemblies and sub-assemblies and assemblies under it, it's going to create multiple build entries. So let's do that. Let me create 125 here. And what this transaction is going to end up doing is going to create two builds for me. It's going to build in the background this unit, which may or may not even build some of the alloy, and it's going to build this finished good that we have here. So I'm going to hit save and close. Hit OK. Okay, so I'm actually going to look at this finished good here for a second and hit Control Q or Quick Report, where you can see I originally assembled just the 300. Those 1200 I didn't assemble. Those 1200 were automatically assembled because this consequent assembly required 1500 and I only had 300 left. So that's the power of that sub-assemblies option that we see there. Okay, so a couple of other things that I want to cover from the questions. One of the most common questions I have, what if we have a new product that essentially replaces a component throughout multiple assemblies? So I'll give you an example. Let me go into my item list here. So remember, we have this copper by the pound and this gold by the pound. And this copper by the pound may potentially be used in multiple assemblies. And for me to go into each of them manually and double click and replace it with another product or go find it until it's used, it would take a very long time. Let's say, for example, that this product gets replaced with a new product. So I'm going to click on new, and let's say we'll create a new product called light copper. I'll put here by the pound. And let's say this one is $123 each. I'm going to put here do not sell, as I mentioned before. Do not sell. Perfect. And I'll hit OK. And let me go ahead and receive some. So let me go to vendors, enter bills, and I'll go ahead and receive some. So there's my light copper. And let's say that now I received 6,000 of those. And I'll hit save and close. Okay. So now if I wanted to automatically replace this component, so I no longer use the regular copper, I use the light copper, what I can do is I can click on the product that's being replaced. So this one here called copper, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to right click and click on where used in assemblies, and then it's going to say, okay, the copper component, in this case, it's only being used in one assembly. So if it was being used in many, you can just hit select all and it will select however many are there. And I can say I no longer use this component, I now use light copper. So when I click replace and I hit close, when I now go into my alloy, you're going to see that now the new component is being used. So that's a really important feature that's only available in QuickBooks Enterprise. None of the other editions of QuickBooks can do that replacement. Another really critical feature here is when I, for example, I'm going to make an assembly. Let me show you. Go to build assemblies and I'll do the alloy. This grid here, this bill of materials, can actually be changed on the fly. So for example, let's say I forgot to go into my item list and change it in my item list. I can come in here and say, no, we recalculated shipping. Shipping is actually $2.89 per pound. So when I build, let's say, an additional 50, it's going to build in a new cost. Only QuickBooks Enterprise can do changing bill of materials on the fly from the assembly screen. So there's three important components if you're working with QuickBooks Premier. I'm not sure. I mean, this is this webinar is supposed to be focused 100% on enterprise, but I understand some people work with QuickBooks Pro and QuickBooks Premier. If you're working with QuickBooks Premier, you, number one, cannot automatically build sub-assemblies. You cannot track lot numbers the way we've been doing them here briefly. You cannot change components on the fly, the quantity as we're doing it now, or even adding more components. Let's say I wanted to add some labor. I can add some direct labor here if I wanted to as well, and add, let's say, half an hour of labor, whatever it is. So I can actually make these changes on the fly like this in the screen, where in QuickBooks Premier I can't. So automatically build sub-assemblies, changing build assemblies on the fly, tracking lot numbers, and swapping the components when they're not used anymore are only available in QuickBooks Enterprise. I get those questions quite often in terms of what is what. Okay, perfect. Let me now open it up to some questions. Let me see what kind of questions I have here. There's a few. So somebody says, how do you track scrap? Okay, well, we'll cover that because that's actually a really good question. So how do you track scrap? And I had this issue the last time. So let's say, for example, that after I build my alloy, let me just go back in here. Let's say that even though it consumes, like if you notice here that I put a little extra, even though creating this process, it consumes a little bit of extra gold. That gold doesn't really get evaporated. It just becomes what we call maybe scrap gold, which could be used for something else. So the logical approach that most people would have is, and let me just create another item here called gold scrap. So we'll do gold scrap by the pound, and I'll leave a zero. I'll leave zero there. So the logical approach to anyone, right, it would be to put negative 0.04 or something like that. But the problem is that this is a restriction that QuickBooks has where you cannot have negative assembly items. So unfortunately, there is no way to track scrap at the assembly level. However, the only way to track scrap is after I create my, let me just hit quick report here. So after I do my assembly, and I know that it generates 0.04 pounds per 1200, I have to just remember to manually build the, where am I, inventory, adjust inventory quantity on hand to manually create the scrap. I have to create the scrap from the process. So just go to gold scrap and increase these to 0.04 times 1200. Okay, and I would have to then have that my additional scrap here and do an adjustment. Right? And the adjustment typically would go to maybe a cost of goods sold account called scrap or something like that. And then when you sell it, you run it through the same account. That way, it doesn't really affect your inventory per se, right? But that is the challenge that we have, that it just doesn't do. It just does not track scrap at the assembly level. So scrap, which is that comment that Don made, can only be adjusted through a journal entry. Let's see, could you cover reports printouts that you give to the floor to convey work orders to the floor? Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, you can create a pending build. So the only way to really create your assembly first, sort of in a planning stage, to say, okay, today I want you to build 1200 of these, would be to mark this as pending. So we click this little edit button here called mark as pending. And basically what this does is it doesn't actually affect your inventory, but it does allow you to create the build itself and print it. Just to mark as pending. Hit preview. So then you can have this build assembly that says pending. And basically this is how you tell people, go build this, right? Or go assemble this, or whatever your process is in your manufacturing facility. So you have to create the build first, mark it pending, send it to be done. when the people come back and give it to you says this is complete, you open up your assembly and you click on this little button here that says remove pending status. You click on that button and then it converts it into from a pending build to an actual posting build. Okay. All right. The other question I have here is how do you manage shortage reports? Okay, so let's talk about that. And that will probably be the last question we'll answer here. So let's say, for example, that I want to build some alloy, but I'm going to be short on one of these materials. So let me go ahead and go to build assemblies. And it says here that the most I can build is 162.50. It actually tells me that that's the most I can do. So if I try to build 200, for example, and hit tab, QuickBooks will say, warning, you can't do this. Okay, you have two choices. You can either make a spending, which means that you're gonna now figure out where your other raw material is, and maybe you have to receive it into your inventory before you can actually process the build, or go to show shortage. And the shortage report basically says, this is how much you have on hand, this is how much you want to build, and this is how much you will have available, which is negative 5150, and now you need 5150. So at this point, you can actually use this to create, let me see, this is 200. Let me see, shortage. Where are we going to be short on in this case? We're going to be short on, let me mark a spending for a second. So market spending, so I'm going to need 80 of these, which I have 6,000 off, and I have 120. I'm going to need 128 to have 104 on. Okay, so I just wanted to double check. So what I'm going to be short on is gold. So let me click on the show shortage report, and it tells you here what you're going to be short on. So what you can do at this point is create a PO. So go to vendors, create my PO, purchase some gold. And I'll purchase, how much am I short by? I'll just purchase 100. I do save and close. Then receive the inventory. That should be this one. So then once I have it in stock, then I no longer will have a shortage. I can now remove the pending. Okay. So the shortage report will no longer show me that I have any gold missing in this case. But let me go ahead and delete that build just to show you the effect that this has. So that assembly is already complete. It's already saved, it's complete, it's now marked as pending. I'm going to go ahead and delete that receipt that I just did. Okay, and once I go into my assembly, notice that my assembly can no longer be saved because it has to be marked as pending. So I'm going to hit save and close. Okay, and then I'm going to go into the reports menu, inventory, and go into my assembly shortage report. And now this report will tell me, look, I was short on my alloy, and I was short on my finished goods, and it tells you everything you're short on based on the assembly. So you can see everything you're short on based on the assemblies, and then you can use that to build your, or to order, or to build whatever you're short in. Okay, let's see what other questions we have here. Let me see. What is the easiest way to unassemble something? So there's no way to unassemble. Okay, you can't unassemble. You would have to use an inventory adjustment for that. So just to answer that real quick. So let's say, for example, I wanted to unassemble 50 pounds of that work in process item. I would have to just do a journal entry, pick where's my work in process alloy, and say I wanted to unassemble 50 pounds of it. So let's do 149.7 minus 50, and then grab my raw materials and then let's say that's 50 times point, forgot what this was, times 4, and then gold with a regular gold, and this was 0.64, so it'll be 50 times 0.64. Okay, so you would have to make those changes, and I think, by the way, so 20 is the difference, so 3940 plus 20, whoops, I was supposed to just add it to it. So this is 104 plus 32. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking away some of my disassembling my product basically by doing an adjustment. The problem with disassemblies or unassemblies is that any external costs that are added to that, like labor or freight, is not going to be accounted for here. That's going to hit permanently into my financial statement. So it's an ugly process, and I normally do not recommend doing disassemblies. But if you have to, or unassemblies, it's really the only way of doing it. Let's see. So I have 3 other people asking about the scrap. That's it. Can't really do the scrap. Yeah, 3 people asking about scrap. Yeah, scrap is an issue. Let's see what else we have here. There's a lot of questions. I don't think I'll be able to answer all of them. No, that's it. I'll see if there's any other pending questions, just email me, just because we're on top of the hour and I will want to be respectful for the people that want to leave. So anyway, thank you very much. If you want to get a hold of me, email me, hector@garciacpa.com or hector@enterprise.expert. Visit the website. We have a few articles already posted there. Join the Facebook group. And thank you very much for joining us, and see you next month.